It's often exciting to look to the future of UNO, what it might be like in times to come. Sometimes, though, it's important to stop and take a good look at the past of the university, the people and the happenings that help make the excitement of future history possible. With this in mind, join me for Reflections in Time.
It's a nice late spring day here in 1986 in May, and I'm in a lovely home not too far from the UNO campus on North 58th Street. And it's the home of Jane and Art Kempf. And the reason we're here is we're doing another Reflections in Time. And this time we're doing it reflecting on the life and times of Jane Kempf, who's been my friend and colleague for many years at UNO and the University of Omaha. And now in more recent years, we see her on a friendship basis at social events at the university and other activities, but she and Art are pretty well retired. And they do spend a little of their time in Omaha, along with traveling a lot, and we're glad that, Jane, we could take a little time and come over to your nice home and visit with you today about your time at the university. Jane, you know, you and I have known each other for a lot of years now, but I don't know that I've ever asked you, where did Jane Kempf come from? Are you from Omaha? Are you an Omaha girl? Where did home and life start for you?
Well, I was born and raised in Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Where were you?
And then I moved to Houston, Texas in 1943. And then we came from Houston, Texas to Omaha in 49.
And been in Omaha ever since?
And I've been here ever since.
Now, what brought you and your family to Omaha in the first time? It's a long way from Houston to
Business
Omaha.
move, mainly.
Uh-huh.
And so he was transferred, my husband was transferred here, so that's the reason we moved to Omaha.
So in the late 40s, you came to Omaha, really right after World War II in that period.
Mm-hmm.
And Omaha, you and I have lived here a long time. What was Omaha like? Can you remember what it was like in 49? It's certainly different.
It certainly was. We had streetcars.
Yeah.
We moved to 49th and California.
Oh.
And the streetcars ran right down 49th Street to Dodge and down Dodge.
Yeah.
So, and we got acquainted through joining church, Dundee Presbyterian Church,
Mm-hmm.
which brought me to the campus at UNO.
That brought you closer to the campus.
That's right.
And Dr. Beale belonged to that church, didn't he?
That's right, but Charlie Hoff was the instigator.
Oh, yeah.
So he thought it would be nice if I would come out and work at UNO.
What was your background of school and work and so on? What sorts of things had you done in your early life before you really came to the university, Jane?
Well, I was mainly a homemaker all my married life. However, I did work before I was married in office work.
And you started to raise a family, didn't you?
I raised a family. I have one son, yes. One
and
granddaughter.
You live still in Omaha, too.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so then that's what brought me to the university.
Yeah, now, what year did you come out to UNO?
I started working part-time in 1950, and I worked every year since.
Well, what did Charlie Hoff first put you to work at? What
in the
were you
registrar's office. He really wanted me to take a position in the library, but I didn't want full-time work at that time. And so I started working for Alice Smith and Genevieve Price.
Oh, yes, I remember them both.
And I worked, that was when we had registration 3 times a year. I worked 3 times a year.
Oh, so you were just like so many ladies in later years, you worked registration
That's right.
periods.
That's all I worked.
Did all the various jobs. Registration in those days, that's why I was there, because I want to talk to you about how that's changed in your time. What was registration like the first time you worked it? It was in one room on the campus, I suppose.
One room in the campus and long lines. And I think the thing I remember, I started working making the course cards. Now, if you can imagine making course cards for every class.
Made course cards for every class?
Every class, and every student picked up one of those. We did it with a stamp. And for like Geography 303 and History 101 or History 112 or whatever.
Would you make the class card up as they requested it?
Yes. Well, we had them made up ahead of time, but if we had to add to the class, I had to remake the cards. pink ones were graduate cards and the white ones were undergraduate.
I think I remember those color
You remember
cards.
you recorded the grades on them.
Yeah, that's right. You would
and turned them back in.
Eventually, you'd use that as the way to tell what the grade was for the student. Now, back in those days, the campus, not the campus physically so much as the student body, was kind of small, wasn't it?
It was very small compared to what we have today, yes. But they were great.
Yeah. Do you remember, now this is a hard question maybe, but because to search back in our memory, your first impressions of the campus. It looked, I'm quite sure, different than it does in the spring of 1986. It was smaller, of course, but what else do you remember about it that stands out in your memory?
Well, of course, it was just the one building, plus the field house.
Yeah, that was just about it, wasn't it?
The cafeteria and everything was in the administration building.
Yeah, on a
Remember,
rainy day
and the
like
little
today?
shack was out and back.
The old shack, which was basically the student center.
That was the student center.
And the registrar's office, where was it then?
Well, on the second floor of the administration building.
Yeah, it had a
Room 210,
modest area of offices on the second floor, near the business office, wasn't it?
Yes, that was down the hall.
Yeah.
Dean Gorman was right across the hall.
Yeah. So really all the service areas of the university were really close by there.
And all the deans were in the same building.
Well,
all
like you say, everything
was in that one building.
You didn't have to go out and get your feet wet.
No, you knew everybody in the hallways.
But like you say, it was, it was a lot smaller place. And registration that you were so involved with on a part-time basis there at first was still kind of a big effort because it was then all hand done, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. We hand recorded the grade sheets. Their permanent records the grades were all hand recorded.
A lot of writing.
Miss Price was really responsible for all.
I remember Miss Price, very thin and small, quiet lady.
Quiet lady, but she was a worker.
Yeah.
But when time for grades came in, we all went to one room and locked the door and recorded grades on all the permanent records.
Oh, yes. Everything, though, like you say, hand
done in ink, pen and ink.
But it was really easy. You got to know the students very much so, didn't you, after about 3-4 years of coming across and handling all of their records. In those days, too, one thing I think of that's different, in 1986, and you went through that in your last years before you retired, we got to be much more careful about what we let people know about people's records, didn't we?
Oh, yes.
In those days, anybody that came by could get a copy of my grades, couldn't they, if they wanted it, really?
Well, now, I don't know whether Genevieve would allow that or not. She was pretty close on the records, though. I don't... Of course, in those days, we did just what we were told to do. I mean, I was just an employee. We were assigned jobs, and that was it.
How many people, do you remember, in the registrar's office? Now there are lots of people working. I walk by there, and there are lots of desks and computer terminals and all this stuff. How many folks were with Genevieve and the rest of you part and full-time? Do you recall in a rough way?
I would say no more than 5 or 6 we had full-time.
Well, of course, the student body, too, was maybe like a couple thousand, wasn't it, or something like that?
Oh,
not much
about 6,000.
Or was it with the part-time and everybody?
Of course, you must remember we had bootstrappers in those days.
That's right. We had lots of
lots of bootstrappers.
Now, those people had a lot more records, too, didn't they?
Yes, and of course we had to keep their VA records. We did all of that in there. And also, I think that time we were the admissions office also.
Yeah, admitting people as well as...
We were doing both.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't until later that they broke the...
Two separate departments.
Two separate departments.
Now, one thing that's kind of interesting to visit about with people like you that look back on the university in their time, and you'd have a handle on this because you were so close to it, the number of course offerings that we have and the rooms available in a comparative way were pretty small back here in 1950, weren't they?
They certainly were.
Did you you had a system later, but how did you decide on who was going to be where in what room? That type of thing.
Now, you're not really going to put me on the spot.
Did you just sort of toss a coin?
Oh, well, really, you had to go by room size and capacity. If the class only wanted 15 or 20, naturally I put in a room that would be small, 30. You wouldn't put it in a large room, but sometimes classes ended up in a large room because we didn't have any other alternative.
Yeah, that's still the case today, isn't it?
That's still, well, I think it's a lot better now because we have More classrooms.
Yeah, more classrooms, and of course, a lot of the work that you did by hand is done by a machine.
By computers now, yes.
And along with that, more people to handle it, but of course with more students too. Now, I guess another thing I'd like to ask you about those early part-time is, how long did you work part-time then, Jane?
Till 1959.
So lots of years were spent
just making course cards.
So you really got to know a fair amount about the registrar's office, didn't you?
Oh, yes.
What caused you to decide to work more?
Well, personal circumstances caused me to take a full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
So I stayed on, and Alice Smith, and then Dean Plaster gave me permanent work, so I never left.
Yeah, so then you just stayed. All right. Now, after you had spent these many years, Jane, being part-time and working mainly like my wife has and a lot of other wives during registration, what were some of the things you started to do? Was it still a fairly small staff when you came out full-time?
No, right about 1961, I believe, is when Dr. Bale he decided to make the admissions office separate.
Oh, that's when you split.
And that's when they split, and that's when Alice Smith was going to be the admissions director.
Now, was there an admissions director, a job within the framework of the registrar's office that handled admissions mainly, or did just everybody work on it?
Just Alice and Genevieve.
Oh.
And like I say, there were about 5 of us.
Well, of course, the process of admission, has that changed much over the years? Is that always pretty much the same, is letting somebody come to our university?
Well, I think it's more or less, I really can't speak for the admissions office because I never worked in the admissions area.
When they were all doing it.
Of course, years ago, everybody had to be admitted to the municipal university. I mean, if they had a high school diploma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that you had no.
I don't think there was.
Turn them away.
I don't think so. As I say, I really never worked with the admissions end of it.
No.
But
what were some of the things you started to learn and do that were different? Because eventually you ran the place.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but after Miss Alice Smith left, then she left when they split the 2 offices, and Virgil Sharp became registrar.
Now,
and I was
remember
made
about what year that would have been, Jane?
62, I think it was.
A few years before the merger.
Mm-hmm. And so Virgil was the registrar. Well,
by now the enrollment had started to really come along.
Oh, yes.
About how many would we have had about in those days, maybe?
Oh, maybe 8,000 or 9,000.
A lot more than 6,000. So now we had 2 offices, still located pretty close together,
across the
as they are today.
Mm-hmm. Well, they were separate at that time, but now, of course, it's all one big group, but they're still separate.
Mm-hmm. Now, what were... well, I guess what I'd ask you, Jane, is just the progression of work. You were part-time, now you came full-time, and what sorts of things were you doing? The same thing?
Well, I was just doing everything, plus then I got all the room assignments, which I wasn't doing earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But I started out figuring grade point averages and, just everything that we did in there. I was working on the records and typing and...
Now, did the pattern of what we did for a student, of the records we kept and the way we kept them, starting to change, or was it pretty much the way it had been back in the good old hand days when you locked the door and entered the grades?
Well, then we started typing the things on.
Oh, we moved into typing
Typing
now.
the records. And then we went to... when did we go on the computers the red bars?
Yes.
Did the posting of the grades?
Yeah, we would mid-60s, wasn't it, or
early 60s?
Yeah. I remember crazy red bars running around the halls. That's when we got into computers, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And what did we first use computers for? Just the posting of grades?
Posting your grades.
So still, there were a lot of stuff, a lot of things that were still done by hand.
We still had to do everything else by hand, yes.
But did that change the life and the ease with which we did things then?
Well, yes and no. Of course, we had to take every file out of their folders and put them in boxes and carry them down to the computer room.
I think I saw some of that carrying.
And posted, and then they bring them back, and we would have to refile them. But it did save the posting of the grades, and I think probably more accuracy was, they thought.
You know, you worked there for a long time at the registrar's office on a part-time basis, but then, as you say, in the early part of our taping, you came full-time because of necessities of family and changes in your life. You wanted to work all the time, and you did. And you worked all the time. I could come to the campus early in the morning, and Jane would be there, and Jane was there late, and that became a big part of your life, didn't it? The work that you were so involved with at the registrar's office.
Yes, it was, but I enjoyed every minute of it. It was hard work, but the people that I worked with were so great that it just made it very interesting.
You had a lot of nice people in that office.
Wonderful. Virgil Sharp was a great guy to work for.
Yeah, that's right. We talked a little about Virgil. He's passed on now as we make this tape in the spring of '86. But Virgil, who came out of a radio background, came to the university, went to school a bit, and ended up running the registrar's office. And you worked with Virgil a long time. Tell us a little about Virgil.
Well, he was a great fellow. His health wasn't the best, and so consequently I did learn the office very rapidly, the different jobs, because it was more or less left up to me to. But he was a great fellow to work for, and very considerate. But like I say, I was really left to do most of the big jobs that he was there to back me up. But
and the big jobs really got to be bigger. You were mentioning a while ago, as we were starting to talk about this, that there were really 3 main registration periods a year, right? When we did everything by hand and so on. The spring and fall, and for the summer school, I suppose would be about it, wasn't it? Well, didn't that get to be extended to the point where now it seems like there's registration going on nearly all the time?
Well, we used to have it the way it is now. Let's face it, we had pre-registration for fall and the spring.
In other words, early registration.
Where they could register for fall at the end of the spring session for fall, and then in the fall they'd come back and pick up their packets and change their minds, because over the summer they had decided to take something entirely different.
Here comes drop and add.
Drop and add, and of course we had summer sessions. We had different first, second, and evening. And
we got to have more summer sessions, didn't we, eventually?
So then we kind of made the cycle, and we turned around, and then we went back to just very recently, not recently, I would say, I don't know how many years ago, we went to just the spring and the fall and the summer. Now, through the computers, we're right back to the pre-registration again.
So we go back and forth.
We're making the complete cycle.
Over the years that you worked with it, and it's been a lot of them, is this the way that's the best, or do you think we should do less of it? How does that all work out in your own mind from your experience?
Well, of course, it's a little different now that it's on computer.
Yeah.
But before, we had to hold all the packets, and Velma Titzel, if you remember, Velma in the cashier's office, had those packets all summer long down there. Well, then when they came back in the fall to pay their tuition, then they'd pick up their packet. Well, if they wanted to make a change, then they were back in our office making changes. So this will eliminate a lot of that, because they won't have the packets to hold. It'll all be on computers. So it should work out better.
Like with so many different things, that the computer makes for less and less paper, doesn't it?
That's right. But, a student is bound to change their mind over the summer, that they might even decide to go into a different college entirely. So it does cause for changes.
One of the things that I think I've thought about from time to time, I worked a lot of registrations too in my years. With students, it's just like coming to a store, like for a freshman, the first time. It's hard to know what to eat when you go to the restaurant, and the counseling they get in a big place like ours. Have you ever thought and wondered about really how students personally get along and how they make so many mistakes? It's surprising they get into any classes at all. It's really a big, active place for a little while.
It certainly is.
Now that we've gone to computers, though, and more of a small area, and you've been helping, I've noticed you up there in the new way they do it, why maybe it'll become easier in in a reverse proportion for the student. You know, one thing I wanted to ask you too. You said it a while ago, when we first got going at the university, when you did, there was mainly the administration building and the hut. And do you remember the progression of growth and change of the university and how the buildings were added in your time there?
Well, I do, because it was every building helped me with the classrooms.
That's right, because you had a handle on all the classrooms.
I remember when the applied arts, the engineering building was built.
Yeah.
And, of course, when the library, student center, they were all opened after I worked there.
Did you notice, too, that as we grew and expanded west, really, what we did pretty much, that the university sort of changed?
Well, yes, there wasn't the closeness. I mean, because once the different colleges moved away from the administration building, you more or less lost contact with them. I mean, it wasn't the closeness in the hallways, coffee rooms. Everybody was there, and you knew everybody.
You see all the deans because they'd all come by, and they were all in the same building.
That's right. So that changed, but it wasn't for a good many years, though, before we really, until after the merger, I think, when it really changed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we grew.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about the merger, too, but one thing I wanted to ask you about, too, before we get talking about some of those things, this process of deciding, for years, and I used to come to you myself and ask you, say, could I have this room, or could we move over here? And I suppose 200 other faculty did the same thing, but did you have some sort of system? Sure, you had all these rooms, hundreds of rooms or whatever. They had a certain size, and you had so many students. Did you have a system, a pattern that you used to sort of work that all out for who went where?
Well, like I say, I mainly was the size that made the decision as although there were requirements that some professors had, that they didn't like certain types of rooms, so I tried to keep that in mind. I tried to please them all.
And you got to have a lot of idiosyncrasies like mine, didn't you? He wants this room, they want... Yeah.
I had one that the chairs faced the wrong direction, and one that the windows were the wrong direction.
Why in the world were the windows in the wrong direction?
Well, that was the way it is. Then there were others that wanted the chairs in a semicircle.
Is that?
And then the next instructor would come and scream at me because the chairs were all messed up, you know. It was really interesting.
You really get, in the registrar's office, as much as any office, you really get to know a lot of people.
That's how I got to know everybody so well. I really did. But I enjoyed it, and we always seemed to get along. So, but it was funny, the different requirements.
Can you remember physically all the different places the registrar's office was located? It did move a bit, didn't it?
Well, from the time I was there, yes, it moved from the...
First, where was it first?
Admin building, 208.
Yeah.
Then we went downstairs to 108 or 107, downstairs, 103.
Uh-huh.
Took in that whole first floor. Then we went to the library, the old library, which is now Epley Administration.
Right.
Then we moved from there over to the library temporarily until they remodeled the Epley Administration building completely.
Oh, yeah.
Then we moved back to the Epley, only we were on the other end of it. We were on the south end rather than the north end of the building.
Another thing about the registrar's office that makes it sort of like a gypsy caravan is every time we had one of these registrations we talked about, the big fall registration, spring registration, that you moved so much stuff in the way of records and so on, and cards for classes, over to the field house. When did we first start having everybody come over to the field house to register for classes?
Well, of course...
There in the ballroom.
That was after we went on. However, we did that earlier when it was still dirt floor, but then when Virgil was made registrar, then we went over there when they had the new floor on the field house, which I can't... maybe 64, 65.
Yeah, must have been mid-60s. You mean you were over there when it was a dirt floor, too?
Earlier. We also were in the, I had registration in the...
you get dust in the records.
In the auditorium where in the administration building, before they put seats in there.
I remember registration there. Yeah.
Yeah, we worked out all the balconies and...
Mm-hmm. But then everybody came counseling, everything was pretty much done right there, wasn't it?
Yes.
That was the idea of it. Long lines, but yet they could see their counselor, their teachers, everybody that was involved at the same place. That was a pretty good system, really, wasn't it? Except for the lines?
Except for the lines.
And we tried to cut lines down, didn't we, by like pre-registration and other things, really? To get some people taken care of before the big push?
Yes, we tried that. That's what I say, when we were pre-registration, we tried to break down the lines, which is, I think, what they're trying to do now, and give people an opportunity to get a selection of their classes. But, no, then we moved to the field house. Well, we also went to the library one time.
Yeah.
And Dr. Beer was here.
Yes.
And we registered there.
How did that work?
Oh, it worked fine. We've tried every place. I think the one time, though, when we came there early in the morning and found that line clear across campus waiting to be pre-registered, I don't think I'll ever forget that.
I remember seeing that in my office over in the building.
I talked to someone, and I can't remember who it was, just recently, that they were in that line, and they were reminiscing with me about it.
The one that came from the administration building on across, almost over to the
engineering building, clear across campus. And I think that Virgil just about had a heart attack that morning.
Well, the thing was, we had a lot of students, and yet we'd say, we got a lot of students, but we shouldn't have to have lines this long. But then, what are some of the very simple, or maybe difficult things in some ways, that we did to try to cut down the lines, other than pre-registration? Were there any other things that we tried? I know people would grouse about the time spent in registering.
Well, mainly, I think we finally decided to break them up by colleges, the course cards, and let the faculty start handling and breaking them down in more sections. Before, we didn't have them in as many sections, so if somebody was waiting for something all like in the arts and science college, why they probably would be in one line, where they broke it down to English and speech, now, and I think that's what started breaking them down. Before, we didn't have it.
Oh, it wasn't broken down that way.
I don't think in as many sections. That was the problem. We didn't have as many people working the course cards.
No.
Gosh, we used to be up in room 210, and I would only have maybe 5 or 6 people working course cards for the whole college, university.
And now, in more recent years, before a computer,
they're broken down to every department. Every
department service to desk, and there were faculty members there to help on that.
And English and math in a line all their own, because that is a problem.
But, in all those years of registering people, and you mentioned a couple of things, I bet you've had some interesting experiences, some interesting things that came up, some real snafu problems, or people that did some odd things.
Well, right offhand, I can't say. I know we did, because there was something every registration that would throw you, but...
Did people try to sneak in?
Oh, yes, we've had that.
I had a kid give a speech on how to do that one time, I think. Did you catch them often?
Well, we'd catch some, but there were so many, and it still goes on. I mean, you can never... I don't think you can ever cure that problem.
But in general, the right people get into the right classes.
Oh, yes. The only thing now with the computers, though, which is going to stop a lot of the... People would pull course cards, go through several times how they do it, and have whole cards, which kept other students out of the class.
Yeah.
Now with the computers, that won't happen.
That's good, because,
once it's punched in, that's there.
Because it could happen, and it happened a number of... It seemed like we had a closed class full.
That's right.
But it wasn't.
It wasn't, and that was because they were holding cards for their friends or what have you, and that caused a lot of problems. Especially when class would convene on the first day, and the faculty member would come and say, it was closed early, why don't I have the students? Which is explainable. I mean, I can understand.
But you needed to be pretty diplomatic working in that office, didn't you? Because you had a lot of ruffled feathers.
Yes, you couldn't carry a chip on your shoulder, that's for sure. You had to. But I enjoyed the students, sure. A lot of them had reason to be upset. I mean, mistakes happen.
Oh, sure.
As long as there's human beings, there's going to be
mistakes.
But all in all, I can't think of anything that we didn't resolve peacefully.
Jane, we talked a little about the campus and how it's looked in the years that you've been there and how it's changed, but I think you'll agree with me that the most important part of a university are the people. You mentioned in fond remembrance the people you worked with in your office, and also students, which are a big part of the university and the most important part. But through the years, you worked with me and a lot of other people, a lot of people. And what I wanted to have you do, and I think it's nice when we remember the university from your point of view, I'm quite sure you remember the university by way of people. And if I ask you a question, and I do now, when you talk about UNO or the University of Omaha and we say people, what would be the first name and anything about them that probably pops into your mind, the first person?
Well, of course, I think of Dean Lucas. He was such a great gentleman, and I worked quite closely with him. Well, in fact, I did with all the deans at that time because that was all there was. I mean, we didn't have their assistants and all that we have now.
And heavy secretarial staff and all these people.
But Dean Lucas, well, and Dean Gorman, he was great in education. Dean Harper was in arts and sciences.
Mm-hmm. And
of course, there was Dean Helmstetter.
Yes.
He was a terrific fellow. He wrote I think he wrote the history of the registrar's office.
Did he?
He was always getting information from us, and I never have seen the write-up, but it seemed to me he finished it before he left.
Now, wasn't, this is an aside, but wasn't Helmstetter registrar at one time?
Yes, he was. And then he was dean of
Applied
Arts.
Yeah.
Of course, then there was Colonel Marston that followed him.
Oh, yes, he's passed on now. Yes.
And, of course, I think one of my favorite professors was Paul Beck.
Oh, yes.
And I think the students just thoroughly enjoyed him, and what a shame, what a loss that when he passed away.
And one of the reasons we remember him is because of his great personality.
Oh, he would help a student no matter what hour of the day, and he was always in his office to be of assistance and always laughing, having a good time, but very serious in his classes.
I was fortunate to be officed near him, and that was a pleasure. We had lots of fun together.
And, of course, Paul Kennedy.
Oh, yes, who later became a dean himself.
He later became a dean, but he was in the same complex down the hall. Well, of course, everybody, like you say, was very close together in those years because we only had the one building, and then when they started moving out.
Yeah, they spread around and became big. You didn't see everybody, and you worked with assistant deans and other people rather than... You really, like you say, had a good working relationship and friendship relationship with all these deans.
I did, because they were all involved in what I was doing at that time, because, well, up even till the very end, I guess, they were all pretty well involved in things, because I seemed to keep in touch with them anyway. And
one of the people that we've mentioned from time to time in other ways, and we can't talk about the university back to the 50s and 60s without spending a lot of time with it, and that is our leader during those years, for whom the Student Center is now named, Dr. Mabel L.
Dr. Bale.
What do you remember most about him? And there's a lot we could bring to mind, but certainly you knew him, but what could you share about either he or his wife? He was one of our interesting people and a big bulwark of our past, really.
Well, he was a terrific fellow, a good leader. And at that time, he was our leader. There was no one else.
No question about that.
And what he said, you followed through on, that's for sure, or else you were sorry that you didn't. And I think I'll never forget the time he called Virgil Sharp and myself into his office, and there were other people there. He gave us envelopes. He says, you're the registrar, you're the assistant, and that was it. That was the way
No discussion?
No discussion. We got an envelope, and that was it.
Well, I think that'd be about time, because you've been doing that work as assistant for many years.
Yes, that was for sure, but he was a wonderful person, though. I mean, he led that university through a lot of trying times, but...
Oh, yes, he did indeed.
We were still on top when He gave it up.
Yeah, I think we pretty well knew where we were and where we were heading with him all the time.
That's right. And as I say, he didn't have the means at that time to do what he would like to do, but he was fair, I think, with everyone. I really do. When it came time for salary increases, I think he had to divide it up equally, or it wasn't like a straight across-the-board increase.
No, he took care of each person individually, didn't he, really?
That's what I understood, anyway.
In the fairest way he could. And I think there was, in general, very little grousing on that subject. He ran a tight ship, but we generally accepted it, didn't we?
We accepted it, that's right.
Remember those great meals we used to have at the beginning of the year?
Oh, in the fall when the classes would resume again?
Yeah.
By all means, it was wonderful. And his coffees that he would have at Christmas time, that coffee for the employees.
Yeah, these were just classic get-togethers.
Oh, they were beautiful. And everybody knew each other, and the music, Christmas time, I think, was the nicest.
We'd always have this special concerts around the holiday time. He was a great lover of music and pushed that area a lot, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Other people that come to mind, close co-workers, some of whom we've taped here, I think of Bill Gerbrock. Oh,
Bill, he was the greatest, too. I've really enjoyed working with him up to the very end, and we're still friends. He was a great one to work for. I never had any problems. Even-tempered. He would always go along with whatever I said, whether he liked it or not.
That made it good, didn't it?
Yes. And I think back to some of those at Thelma Titzel, though, in the cashier's office.
Yeah.
We worked so closely years ago. And then, of course, there was Cozney.
Oh, yeah.
I think of him quite often and see him.
And Thelma.
The old Indians, and Thelma Engel, oh, yes. And Yvonne, all the old Indians. And then there's Dr. Aschenbrenner was always a great one I worked closely with his debate.
Well, I think we could go on and talk about people, and we'd still forget some, but if you think of any in our remaining minutes, you go ahead and bring them up, Jane. But one of the things I wanted to mention to our friends out there and have it on this tape of history of the university, you received an honor that most people who've worked at the university haven't received. And it's an honor that was started just a few years ago, and it's for dedication to the university, for work, for outstanding achievement. And what was it that they gave you one year, which was an honor and which a lot of us felt really great about for you?
Well, I was fortunate to receive the Chancellor's Medal, which I shall never forget. I was so surprised. I just never dreamed of anything like that in my lifetime. And it was very rewarding. It was a day like today that I'm still surprised about and nervous about. But to see the standing ovation from the faculty and staff, I shall never forget it. That's why I say I just cherish every person out there at the university. I think they're the greatest.
Well, I think that reflects back on you and the cooperation, assistance, and tremendous job that you did for all of us that you worked with over the years. And I think in the last couple of minutes here, and we've been at this a while, and for those who are watching this tape, I want you to know that Jane Kempf worked very hard to do this tape because she's a little bit shy about things like this, and I'm so glad that she was even willing to do it. But Jane, you just take one more deep breath here, if you would, and go back to the campus now, or look at it from your nice home here on 58th Street, and think about the university and what it's really meant to you in your life and how you feel about the university, if you can put that into words.
Well, I shall never forget the university. In fact, I still work for them in public relations every chance I have. And it has been the most rewarding 30 years that I ever spent. And I shall never forget the cooperation of all the faculty and the rewarding experience working with the students. I think they are just terrific. And, of course, that's really what makes the university. And I did go through some hard times. At times I thought, I couldn't stand another day of it. But somehow or other, somebody would always give me a pat on the back, and that was it. And so I would go on. And I'll never regret a day that I worked at the university. I just think it's the best spot in the city. And they say I will continue to work for the university as long as I'm able.
I know you will. And on behalf of all of us that are still attached in 1986 as we record this program, we want to thank you for joining us and for sharing some of your feelings about the place and the people that have made up our university for this length of time. And what we've been doing here in this spring of 1986 is record in the home of Jane and Art Kempf another look at the university from Jane's point of view. This is Reflections in Time, spring of 1986 with Jane Kempf.
It's often exciting to look to the future of UNO, what it might be like in times to come. Sometimes, though, it's important to stop and take a good look at the past of the university, the people and the happenings that help make the excitement of future history possible. With this in mind, join me for Reflections in Time.